Okay, so let's say that you've chosen a particular experience to work with. As an example, let's say you were 12 years old, you had your bike stolen from the bike shed at school by a bunch of bullies, and when you were walking home you were called by one of the bullies over to a paddock where you saw a bunch of them standing around, and they'd smashed up your bike, broken it to bits, and you went there, collected the bits and pieces. They were abusing you and ridiculing you. You carried the bits and pieces back home, and when you got home you're in serious trouble from your parents for being irresponsible with your belongings, and they went off at you for your bike being all smashed up. And then you had to go to school again the next day and face the same kids. So let's just say that's the kind of experience that we're going to be working with. And let's say now, as an adult, many years later, you have 20 different locks on your front door, you're a nervous wreck whenever you have to leave your car, you know, in a driveway or out in the street. You can't trust anybody, you have no faith in humanity, you can't maintain relationships with people because you simply are not able to trust them, etc. So this bad experience from when you were 12 has had a flow-on effect. It hasn't been adequately processed and digested. Maybe it was overwhelming at the time, and it's had a flow-on effect into your adulthood, so it permeates all of your relationships and your ability to live the kind of life that you want to live. So let's say that's the experience that we're working with. Okay, so as your therapist, the first thing that I would do would be to ask you a range of questions about the experience. And the questions are not so much for me to get information that I need to have, but it's really to tune you in neurologically into a particular brain network where this memory has been stored. So the first question that I'll ask you is, when you think about that experience, what feels like the worst moment? And it may or may not be the obvious moment. The worst moment may have been when you got to the bike shed and you realised after school that your bike had been stolen. It may have been when one of the bullies called you and said, "We've got your bike, come and get it." It may have been when you got there and you saw your bike all smashed into bits and pieces. It may have been when you got home and you were in trouble with your parents for being irresponsible with your belongings. Or it may have been when you had to go to school the next day and you had to enter the classroom and here were these bunch of kids sneering and laughing at you. So maybe any of those. So that's the first question. What feels like the worst moment? Now, when you're in touch with the worst moment, what's the visual picture that pops into your mind's eye that reflects that worst moment? What do you actually see in your mind when you're in touch with that moment? And in our example, let's say the worst moment was when you got to the paddock, there were half a dozen of these bullies standing around laughing at you. You looked on the ground, you saw your bike all smashed into bits and pieces. So let's say that's the worst moment. So that's the visual picture that pops into your mind's eye. What do you see? Well, I see my bike all smashed to pieces on the ground and these bunch of 6 kids standing around laughing at me, poking fun at me. Okay, the next question is, when you're in touch with that picture, what's the negative thought or belief about yourself that comes up and goes along with that picture? It's an unfortunate quirk of humanity. Even when bad things are done to us, we tend to wangle in there a negative view or belief about ourselves, even if we've had no role to play in this bad thing happening. It just seems to be part of what we manage to do to ourselves. So let's say, with this example, the worst moment is seeing the bike all smashed up, the bully standing around laughing. The negative thought about yourself that goes along with that might be something like, I'm a loser, I'm pathetic, I'm weak, I'm not safe, I can't protect myself. Any of those kind of negative thoughts or beliefs about yourself. The next question that you'll be asked is, when you're in touch with that picture of the worst moment and the negative thought or belief about yourself that comes up when you're in touch with that picture, what are the feelings now that come up within you right in this moment when we're having this discussion? I'm asking you these questions. What sort of feelings come up for you? Now, it's possible for a person to answer that question by saying, well, I feel anxious when I think of that, or I feel incredibly sad, or I feel frightened, or I feel angry, I feel resentful. There could be any number of different emotions that go up with that. The next question is, when you're in touch with the picture and the negative thought about yourself and the emotion that comes up for you now when you're in touch with those, what do you notice going on physiologically in your body? You may notice a tension in your shoulders, there may be a constriction in your chest, a tightness in your throat, butterflies or pain in your stomach. There could be any number of different physical experiences that go on for you. So I'm simply asking you, what do you notice going on physically when you're in touch with that? Now, when you've answered those questions, there's a very good chance that you've become neurologically tuned into that memory network, which means that the brain cells on which that memory has been stored become reactivated. And when we're in touch with a memory, about 80% of the same brain cells become activated as do when the actual experience was happening. And 80% is really quite a lot. Okay, so you've become tuned into that memory network. I'll then get you to focus on or bring into your mind the visual picture that you've described to me that goes along with the worst moment. And while you're doing that, I want you to follow my hand backwards and forwards with your eyes. And I'm going to do it about that fast. So your eyes are going backwards and forwards. And what you'll notice could be several things. The basic instruction is, while your eyes are moving backwards and forwards, for you to simply notice what comes up for you. And what comes up is basically whatever presents itself to your awareness as your eyes are moving backwards and forwards. While your eyes are moving, you don't need to make anything happen. You don't need to force any particular outcome. And by the same token, you don't need to stop anything from happening. Your task really is simply just to notice. As though you're sitting in a bus, looking out the window, simply noticing the scenery as it goes past.